The most dangerous story you were ever told is a simple one. If you are good, you will be free. Good people, you were told, sleep peacefully. Good people are loved. Good people are rewarded. Be good, obey, behave, and life will unfold kindly for you. But what if that story is not a path to freedom, but a method of control? What if what you have called virtue your whole life is often just a socially acceptable way of keeping yourself small? What if the voice that whispers, "Be good," is not your conscience at all, but an echo of fear, guilt, and conditioning? From the moment you were a child, the training began. You were praised when you were easy to handle. You were scolded when you were wild. When you expressed anger, you were told you were bad. When you questioned, you were told you were disrespectful. When you wanted something for yourself, you were told you were selfish. Slowly, you learned the rules. Lower your voice. Hide your hunger. Swallow your opinions. Make yourself agreeable. And here is the cruel twist. You weren't only taught to obey, you were taught to be proud of your obedience, to call it character, to call it maturity, to call it kindness. You learned to feel guilty when you said no. You learned to feel ashamed when you took up space. You learned to feel afraid when you disagreed. In a world like this, being good often means being convenient. Society applauds the convenient. It celebrates those who follow instructions, who adapt to whatever is expected, who repeat what they have been taught without asking too many questions. It builds entire systems to reward the obedient student, the compliant employee, the quiet citizen. But there is someone society does not know what to do with. The person who refuses to be tamed, the one who insists on their own path, the one who values truth more than approval, the one who would rather stand alone than live as a copy. And this is why the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche still disturbs so many people today. Nietzsche does not come to comfort you. He does not pat you on the head and say, "You're doing just fine. Keep playing your role." He arrives like a storm. He tears down the curtains. He switches on the lights in a room you have carefully kept in the dark. When you read "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," you are not reading a self-help manual. You are encountering a voice that wants to burn away everything false in you. Your second-hand morals, your inherited virtues, your fear dressed up as goodness. This video is not here to tell you how to be nice. It is here to ask a more dangerous question. Are you truly moral? Or are you just well-trained? Because if you are living your life trying desperately to be a good person, there is a real chance you are acting in a play written by someone else. You may have been bending for so long that you genuinely don't remember what it felt like to stand straight. This is not a defense of cruelty. This is not a celebration of selfishness. This is not an excuse to trample on others. It is a call to something deeper than all of that. Authenticity. To live from the inside out, not the outside in. To act from your own center, not from the eyes of others. To discover, maybe for the first time, what you actually are when you are not numbing yourself with the approval of the crowd. Nietzsche saw something most people would rather ignore. The morality we inherit is not neutral. It is not a law of nature. It is a human invention shaped by history, by power, by fear. And a lot of what passes for virtue has one main purpose: to tame you, to make you predictable, to make you harmless, to make you easier to manage. Your goodness may simply be a habit of shrinking, of hiding behind what is socially praised, of pretending to be noble when, deep down, you are simply afraid of what will happen if you finally live as you truly are. And that's the part that hurts, because you know. Somewhere inside you, beneath the layers of politeness and fear, there is something explosive, something that wants to create, something that wants to say what you actually think, something that wants to love fiercely, work fiercely, live fiercely. But every time it rises, you push it back down. You call it ego. You call it dangerous. You call it not nice. Nietzsche looks at that part of you and says, then let it be dangerous. True virtue is not the virtue that fits in. It is the virtue that overflows. It is not the virtue that quietly obeys the rule. It is the virtue that is so alive, it ends up rewriting the rule. If this video serves any real purpose, let it be this: to remind you that the world has no idea what you are capable of when you stop living as a shadow of yourself. This is where the journey begins. When Nietzsche writes the famous words, "God is dead," he is not making a cheap joke about religion. He is not simply attacking believers. What he is describing is much bigger: the collapse of an entire worldview. For centuries, people in the West lived with an unquestioned assumption that there is a divine order to the universe, that morality comes from outside of us, that life has a pre-written meaning attached to it. If there is a God who commands, then there are absolute rules. There is a clear right and wrong. There is a cosmic authority who guarantees that goodness is rewarded and evil is punished. But Nietzsche looked at the modern world and saw something terrifying. People still talked about morality as if that system were intact. Yet beneath the surface, faith in that old structure was crumbling. Science was rising. Institutions were losing their sacred aura. People were questioning everything except the one thing they should have questioned first: the very source of their moral values. God is dead does not mean that some being in the sky has literally died. It means the old foundation of meaning has fallen apart. There is no longer a ready-made script, no unquestionable commandments, no eternal safety net. And what remains when that structure disappears? At first, chaos, a sense of emptiness, a dizzying freedom, the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff with no railing. If there is no predefined meaning, then nothing is guaranteed. Not justice, not cosmic fairness, not moral order. You are no longer handed a purpose. You have to create one. Most people don't want this responsibility. They would rather cling to old beliefs, even if they no longer truly believe them, than stand exposed in that vast openness. But Nietzsche does something radical. He plants a seed right in the middle of this abyss. The seed of a new possibility. The Übermensch, the Overman. The Übermensch is one of Nietzsche's most misunderstood ideas. It is not a comic book superhero. It is not a dictator. It is not a better race, or anything close to the toxic misreadings history has attached to the term. The Übermensch is, at its core, a symbol. It represents a human being who has learned to live without leaning on external structures of meaning. Someone who no longer needs a divine commandment, a social script, or a rule book to live with depth, intensity, and direction. This person does not wake up asking, "What am I allowed to do?" They ask, "What am I called to create?" They do not spend their life chasing approval. They have built an inner axis, a spine that does not bend with every cultural wind. They do not belong to the herd, but they also do not define themselves in childish opposition to it. They are not just rebels. They are creators of values, not just destroyers of old ones. Nietzsche saw the human being as a bridge and not as a final destination, a bridge between animal and Übermensch. The tragedy, he says, is that most people choose to build a house in the middle of that bridge. They cling to their old certainties, their inherited values, their familiar fears. They choose comfort over growth, repetition over transformation. They spend their entire life trying to fit into a world that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. The birth of the Übermensch is painful, precisely because it demands destruction. The destruction of your previous self-image. The destruction of the false virtues you paraded for others. The destruction of the comforting belief that someone else is ultimately responsible for your life. It is a kind of inner death, the death of the obedient self, the death of the version of you that lives on its knees. Maybe you recognize yourself in this transition. The old beliefs don't quite make sense anymore. The promises you were given about goodness, obedience, and security ring hollow. You can feel that there is something more, and yet you are terrified of letting go of the edge you've been clinging to for as long as you can remember. That tension, the place where your old meaning has collapsed, but your new meaning has not yet appeared, is exactly where creation happens. Nietzsche does not come to rescue you from that place. He comes to tell you, do not run back, walk forward. If you want true freedom, you will have to give up the illusion that someone else will hand your life to you, prepackaged and safe. You will have to face the void. You will have to become the one who writes the script. To do that, the first thing you must see clearly is the trap you were born into, the morality that domesticates you. You were trained to think that doing good is always the same thing as being moral. Help others, follow the rules, carry your responsibilities quietly. That, you were told, is what makes you a good person. But Nietzsche invites you to look closer at what is actually happening inside you when you act this way. Is your goodness coming from strength or from fear? Because there is a kind of virtue that is not noble at all, though it wears a noble mask. It is the virtue that demands you prove yourself constantly, the virtue that drains you, the virtue that lives not in your heart, but in the eyes of others. It tells you that you must always sacrifice yourself, that wanting anything for yourself is selfish, that setting boundaries is cruel, that having a strong will is dangerous. It disguises itself as altruism, but is soaked in vanity and fear. Nietzsche gave a name to the value system that grows out of this mentality: slave morality. Slave morality is born from resentment, from the perspective of those who feel powerless, who cannot act on their deepest impulses, who then create a moral system that condemns anyone who can. Instead of saying, I cannot, they say, you must not. They call strength evil. They call intensity arrogance. They call passion sin. Have you noticed how often good people live in constant judgment? They smile politely, but inside they are measuring, weighing, comparing. They are quick to criticize those who live boldly. They are eager to label others as selfish, arrogant, too much. Why? Because your freedom exposes their fear. Your authenticity reveals their obedience. Your courage reminds them of every risk they never took. And the cruelest part is this: you have internalized this virtue. You have become both the prisoner and the guard. How many times have you felt guilty for saying, no, I can't do that? How many times have you silenced your creativity because you were afraid of being judged? How many times have you turned down an opportunity, not because it was wrong for you, but because you were afraid someone might disapprove? That is slave morality at work inside you. It forces you to live outward, never inward. To measure your worth by your usefulness to others, never by your fidelity to yourself. But Nietzsche does not leave you there. He sketches the possibility of a different kind of virtue, one that does not chain you, but arises from your inner abundance. At the end of the first part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche offers one of his most beautiful images, the virtue that gives. This is not the virtue of the martyr, who lives to be praised for suffering. It is not the virtue of the anxious helper, who cannot rest unless everyone approves of them. It is a virtue that does not come from duty, fear, or guilt. It comes from fullness. Zarathustra talks about the spirit that gives because it is overflowing, like a cup that cannot contain the abundance of what is inside it, like a river that spills over its banks not out of obligation, but out of sheer volume. He compares this virtue to the sun. The sun does not carefully choose who deserves its light. It does not calculate a reward. It does not send you an invoice for warmth and energy. It shines because shining is what it is. This is the model of the highest human being for Nietzsche, a person who has so developed their inner power, their wholeness, their creative energy, that they no longer need rules to tell them how to be decent. They act from their nature, not from their fear. They give because there is too much life in them to keep it all inside. Here comes Nietzsche's harsh critique. You worship your cup of virtue, he says, as if it were the chalice of life, but its contents corrupt you. He is speaking to people who cling to their identity as good, the way a child clings to a toy. People who use their morality as a way of avoiding the harder task of becoming real. What many call virtue, he suggests, is often just pride in disguise, a desperate attempt to be seen as pure, a way of controlling others by being morally superior to them. The gift-giving virtue is the opposite of that. It does not demand anything. It does not ask for applause. It does not parade itself as special. It simply overflows. It is like a river that carries everything with it, both what you might call good and what you might call bad. Because true giving does not carefully edit itself to impress you. It just is. And after giving, Zarathustra withdraws. He returns to his solitude, not because he is exhausted by resentment, but because even the richest spirit needs time to renew itself. Even the noblest virtue dies if it is not reborn. In this, Nietzsche shows a mature vision. To be great is not to give endlessly until you break. To be great is to know when to give, when to retreat, when to rebuild. This is not just an ethics. It is a style of existence. Now we arrive at the center of the idea. True virtue can only exist where there is fullness. This is a complete rebellion against traditional teaching. You were told virtue is effort. That to be good is to constantly fight against yourself, to suppress your anger, bury your desire, distrust your joy. You were told that the moral life is a life of tension between what you want and what the rules demand. But Nietzsche says, no. True virtue does not come from this inner civil war. It comes from the end of it. Think of a person who is deeply at peace with themselves, someone who has faced their own darkness, who has integrated their shadow, who knows their desires and does not run from them. This person does not need to keep themselves on a tight leash. They are not a wild animal, threatening to break loose at any moment. They are more like a musician who has mastered their instrument so completely that they can now play without effort. Their generosity flows naturally. Their strength expresses itself calmly. Their boundaries are clear without being cruel. Their actions are not driven by anxiety, guilt, or the need to prove they are good. They are driven by alignment with who they truly are. That is what Nietzsche means by fullness. When you live from fullness, kindness is not a performance. It is a side effect of being grounded in your own power. When you live from fullness, you do not help others to erase yourself. You help because you have something real to offer. When you live from fullness, saying no is as natural as saying yes, because both come from the same rootedness. In the old model, virtue is like carrying a heavy backpack uphill. In Nietzsche's model, virtue is like water flowing downhill, effortless, not because it takes no energy, but because it is aligned with gravity, aligned with your nature. To understand how deep this runs, you don't have to dive into abstract theory. Just look around you. Watch the small, ordinary scenes that repeat every day. A young woman agrees to help a colleague with yet another project, even though she is already exhausted. She smiles, says, "It's no problem," and then stays up late into the night, finishing work that is not hers. The next day, people call her so reliable, so kind. Inside, she feels hollow. A son visits his parents and lies about his career, his relationships, his beliefs, just to avoid conflict. They say, "We're so proud you turned out the way we wanted." He nods, but it is not pride he feels. It is distance from himself. A friend group makes fun of someone who isn't there. One person in the circle feels uneasy, but laughs along anyway. They do not want to be the strange one, the serious one, the one who can't take a joke. Later that night, they think about it and feel a quiet disgust, not at their friends, but at their own cowardice. In each case, nothing dramatic happens. No one screams. No one is arrested. No one is condemned in public. On the surface, everything looks normal. But deep down, something is slowly dying. The ability to trust oneself. These are the tiny self-betrayals that slave morality feeds on. This is how the herd maintains itself, not by grand acts of oppression, but by millions of small daily choices to obey what you do not respect, to agree with what you do not believe, to pretend you are fine when you are not. When Nietzsche speaks about the herd, he is not insulting ordinary people. He is pointing at a pattern in all of us, the part that would rather belong than be whole, that would rather be safe than be real. Seeing this clearly is not about hating the world. It is about refusing to keep participating in your own disappearance. So what happens to goodness if you take Nietzsche seriously? Does it just vanish? Do you simply stop caring about others and worship your own will? Not if you understand him deeply. When the old structure collapses, good and evil as rigid categories lose their power. But this does not mean nothing matters. It means you are invited to participate in creating what matters. Redefining goodness does not mean discarding compassion. It means separating compassion from self-erasure. It means learning the difference between helping from weakness and helping from strength. You can ask yourself, when I help, am I secretly hoping to be admired, needed, or morally superior? When I sacrifice, am I doing it freely, or because I'm terrified of losing approval? When I am nice, am I being honest, or am I hiding conflict under a thin layer of politeness? Goodness, redefined, might look like this. Telling the truth even when your voice shakes. Saying no when something violates your integrity. Taking care of your own body and mind so that your presence in the world is not a burden. Offering help from a place of choice, not compulsion. Understood this way, goodness is no longer a script others hand to you. It becomes a living, evolving expression of who you are at your best, after you have stopped lying to yourself. For Nietzsche, the highest good is not obedience, but the flourishing of life. The question becomes, does this choice make me smaller or larger? Does it deaden me or intensify me? Does it chain me to resentment or open me to creation? When you start asking those questions, morality stops being a cage and becomes a path. Not a path someone else has walked for you, but the one you are, step by step, daring to create. So how do you know whether you are living from fullness or from fear? From real virtue or from the morality of the slave? Ask yourself, do you constantly feel tired from taking care of everyone except yourself? Do you feel guilty whenever you choose what you actually want? Do you replay conversations in your head, wondering if you sounded selfish? Do you help others, but secretly resent them afterward? Do you say yes, while a quiet voice inside you is screaming no? These are signs that your goodness is costing you your soul. Now ask, have you ever done something kind, generous, or brave, and felt no need to tell anyone about it? Have you ever given, not because you were supposed to, but because it felt like a joy? Have you ever said no and felt a strange sense of self-respect rush in afterward? Have you ever disappointed someone, and in doing so, finally stopped disappointing yourself? These are signs that something deeper is waking up. You are beginning to move from the virtue that demands to the virtue that gives, from obedience to authenticity, from moral performance to existential honesty. Philosophy is not meant to stay in books. If Nietzsche is right, his ideas should reach into your daily life, your small choices, your voice, your posture, your yes and your no. So how do you begin to move towards this gift-giving virtue? First, notice where you betray yourself. Pay attention to the exact moments your body tightens and you say yes anyway. The situations where you feel that inner flinch but override it to keep the peace. These are not small things. Each one is a tiny act of self-abandonment. Second, experiment with honest no's. You don't have to start with the hardest conversations in your life. Start small. Say no to a plan you don't want. Say no to a favor you genuinely don't have the energy for. Observe what happens. The world will not end. People may be disappointed, but you will still be here, and something in you will feel cleaner, lighter, more real. Third, create something that is only yours. Slave morality keeps you stuck reacting to the expectations of others. Gift-giving virtue grows from creation. Write something, build something, learn something, practice something that no one asked you to. Answer to your own curiosity for once. What fascinates you when nobody is watching? What would you work on if no one were ever going to see the result? Follow that thread. Fourth, spend time in solitude. Nietzsche's Zarathustra repeatedly returns to solitude, not to escape humanity forever, but to recharge, to refine, to remember who he is away from the noise. You also need spaces where you are not performing, not pleasing, not being evaluated. Sit with yourself long enough that you can hear your own thoughts again, not just the echoes of what the herd is shouting. Fifth, accept that some people will not understand. The moment you begin stepping out of your role as the good, obedient person, some people in your life will feel threatened. They depended on your compliance. They were invested in your self-erasure. You are not responsible for their comfort. You are responsible for your integrity. Walking this path is not about becoming cold or hostile. It is about becoming honest. The ones who truly love you will adapt. The ones who only loved the version of you that served them may fall away. This, too, is part of crossing the bridge. So here you are. On one side, the life you were trained for. Safe, obedient, morally approved, slowly suffocating. On the other side, a life you cannot fully imagine yet. Risky, unpredictable, morally ambiguous to some, but alive, real, yours. In between, the bridge. Nietzsche cannot walk it for you. No philosophy can. But his voice, through Zarathustra, can do one thing. It can make it unbearable for you to keep pretending you are free while still living on your knees. The question is no longer, am I a good person? The question is, am I mine? Do I belong to myself? Do my values feel like something I chose or something I inherited? Is my kindness an overflow of strength or a mask I wear to hide my fear? Am I living a life that feels true to what I am, or just a life that earns me the label of good from people who do not even know me? You do not have to answer all of this today. You do not have to become the Übermensch overnight. But you can start with one small, radical act. Tell yourself the truth. Admit where you are still obeying. Admit where you are still performing. Admit where you are still hiding behind virtue. From that honesty, something new can begin. The lie you were told is that being good will make you free. The deeper truth is that freedom begins the moment you are willing to be real, even if that reality looks less good from the outside. True virtue is not fragile. It does not tremble at the judgment of the herd. It does not beg for recognition. It overflows. It creates. It gives. And then, quietly, it walks away. If you are ready, truly ready, then step forward. Because after you see all of this clearly, you may find that you can never again go back to being just good. You will have to become something much more dangerous and much more beautiful, yourself.